placement, it's charismatic, it has sex appeal, that's not going to cause that person any problem. However, having Pluto conjunct Moon is going to cause problems because it's sort of like death of the mother or being castrated emotionally quite early, and it's going to cause problems in that person, specifically with them as children or emotionally or losing partnerships unexpectedly, things like that. Next is squares and oppositions. Now, squares, not everybody has squares and not everybody has oppositions. And then the third one, which this particular client has none, and I'm not going to spend much time talking about, are quincunxes. What makes aspects hard? Hard aspects, in a nutshell, are two planets that are on the same cross. In a previous video, I talked about the 3 crosses. You've got the cardinal cross, you've got the fixed cross, and you've got the mutable cross. For the most part, if 2 planets are on the same cross, they are going to create a hard aspect. There are things called orbs, and there are other factors, not for this introductory video, but just to give you a general synopsis. This particular person has 4 squares, and they have 4 oppositions. So there's quite a bit of tension in this person's life, quite a bit of work that they came to accomplish. I personally like hard aspects. I think it makes for a very interesting lifetime, and it makes a lifetime perhaps harder, and you have to work more, but it makes you utilize your tools, your trines and your sextiles, so that you can get through the harder times. Some people have a lot of trines in their chart and they have a easier lifetime. That's obviously a very individual thing. I'm no one to decide if someone is having a harder or an easy lifetime, but the reality is that charts that have more squares and oppositions tend to be more challenging lifetimes, and those people tend to work harder, and I'm just saying that lightly because they have more to overcome, and it can often be a more challenging lifetime but a more rewarding one because it was a lifetime that was very productive. We choose this at the moment of conception. This is not a judgment. Every soul has chosen their lifetime, and at this lifetime you might have chosen a light bag, maybe you chose a heavy bag. That's a personal choice. I or nobody can tell you if that's good or bad. There's no judgment there. Okay, so let's start with the squares. Squares are when 2 planets are in odds and they're an internal dialogue, an internal struggle. This is the big difference between squares and oppositions. Oppositions are 2 opposing planets that are at odds with one another, but they're reflected as something outside of you. So one is internal, one is external. Everything is internal. Everything is a mirror, and everything is being reflected as such. However, the way it manifests in your life is going to reflect as an external, that someone's doing something to you, and then you can use it as a mirror, or it is you and your internal dialogue. I call this negative internal dialogue the perfect older sister. So that's how I like to refer to squares, as the perfect older sister. Because the perfect older sister is constantly just telling you, you should have done this, you should have done it better. And we all have that. So even if you don't have squares, all of us have some little perfect older sister voice in us that creates self-doubt, judgment, conflict internally. People that have a lot of squares, for instance, like this person who has over 4, are going to find that they might have an extreme perfect older sister, self-doubt, internal voice that's constantly beating them up. So let's start with the first square. The first square is Mercury square the moon. So we have Mercury square the moon, and I told you that you're going to find these on the same cross, and you've got the mutable cross there. The fixed cross is the cross of transformation, and it's the one that rarely gives any energy. I call it the hoarder cross. The mutable cross is the one that gives energy and rarely takes anything for itself. And the cardinal cross is a little bit more balanced, where it gives and takes. Every cross has its positives and every cross has its negatives. When something is in the mutable cross, like this gentleman, then you're going to see that there's going to be an energy of getting left or not getting enough, So you're going to find that sort of meaning within the two planets. So the moon has to do with the mother, the moon has to do with emotion, the moon has to do with childhood, the moon has to do with everything that is sort of emotional memory, past, sentiment, and you have Mercury. And because they're square, those two planets have to be at odds. This might be a person who has a speech problem. This person might become extremely emotional when they're speaking. They can't speak from a rational place because they're so tied into the emotional nature. They also have Pluto square Venus. So you have Pluto square Venus. Pluto and Venus together are planets of control. This could be someone who creates a thyroid problem because there's control issues. And the reason that I'm focusing on health in this particular commentary is because they have a moon in Virgo. The moon in Virgo will inevitably manifest itself as something in the body. And you also have Pluto ruling the ascendant, and the ascendant has to do with the physical body. I also told you that there was a big pattern of the number 6. 6 is the sixth house of health, so it's possible that they might have some thyroid issues or some issues with control that perhaps represents fifth chakra stuff, okay? It also is being possessive, Pluto Venus, because it's possessive either with money or with love or with people, and perhaps they lost someone at a young age that they're possessive of people in relationships. The next square is the black moon square Saturn. So you have the black moon and you have it square Saturn, again on the mutable. So this is the third one on the mutable, and the fourth one is also on the mutable, which is black moon square Uranus. So all 4 of the squares are on the mutable cross, and this will tell you that this person sort of gets left sort of undermined, or they get left without. So they're sort of making soup and feeding the community, but they're getting left unfed, even though they're the ones feeding the rest of the group. So this is something important in the counseling mechanism, because you want to tell them that they have to sort of be a little bit more what they might deem as selfish, but what I would call more self, where they have to put themselves first. So black moon Saturn, both black moon and Saturn rule death, rule depression. So this is going to be somebody who perhaps struggles with depression. If they're an 8th house sun, that's very common, because if they're hiding and they're a mask and they're hiding their true selves, that would make a lot of sense. They're Geminis. Geminis tend to have anxiety, bipolar, sometimes mental illness, even if it's non-diagnosed. But they tend to have that because, remember, they're flip-flopping. They're going from underworld to upper world, underworld to upper world. So we're going to see this mechanism of a flip-flop nature that can cause anxiety, panic attacks. Gemini signs, because they rule validation needs, they rule movement, it's very much a need of validation. So there's going to be a tendency towards depression or some sort of mental health issue with the black moon and Saturn, because they both rule death, darkness, depression, things like that. Notice that the horizon is here, and these planets are all on the bottom of the chart. So think of this as the iceberg that Freud talks about, where things are below the iceberg, and this is more what we show the world. And so both of these planets, it might be a low-grade depression, something that's hidden, but it might be they're causing some anxiety or panic. And then you have black moon Uranus. Black moon and Uranus are 2 planets that are in control, that both rule liberty. This is a person with an extreme desire for freedom, liberty, independence, going against the family, not repeating the familial patterns. So now you have somebody that at 7 years old turned into a Cancer, extremely dependent on the family, someone who might have a low-grade level of depression and anxiety, and they're also creating a lot of chaos in their lives because they don't want to have family patterns repeated, which are going to be inevitable, and they are freedom, and then as a result, with people that are very much drastically seeking freedom, what we find is chaos. So this is going to create a lot of chaos, a lot of confusion. The ruler of the chart is Neptune. That's going to be the first planet that you find, and that is going to dictate a lot of the energy. And I remember that when I was looking at this chart, I made a note on my paper. I said, wow, there's so much confusion in this chart, just kind of looking at it. I always start by just looking at the chart and seeing what it says to me intuitively. And I kept seeing Neptune instead of Pluto. And I just realized it's because Neptune is on the ascendant and it's the ruler of the chart. So even though there's so much Scorpio and Pluto in this particular chart, which is that regeneration, and yes, it's some darkness and depression, but Pluto is a very strong sign, there's a lot of confusion with Neptune because Neptune is confusion and delusion. So this person has to have a species of delusion and confusion and not really knowing which way to go, who am I, what am I doing? And this can also cause some sort of mental, and when I talk about mental disorders, I'm not talking about, that I'm diagnosing anyone. I'm simply just saying, anxiety, depression, panic, things like that might just be sort of general terminology, not necessarily diagnosing.